have our year-long seminar series for instructors, incorporating technology into the classroom setting in various ways, which is principles and practices of integrating teaching and technology. And we had our first seminar yesterday, titled Building in the Basics. What was it? Fundamentals of Incorporating Technology into the Classroom Setting.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't even really get into any specific technologies. We're talking about basic principles of how to use technology in your classroom. And we, if I remember correctly, we started with, as always, your learning objectives and talking about planning to meet those objectives. We talked a little bit about training our students, about leveraging the types of activities that we have with technology, and then we finished by talking about reflecting on what we've done.
Exactly. So the first bullet point that we had was to plan your objectives and your sort of your pedagogical goals for either the class as a day or as a week or as a semester. Maybe your pedagogical goals as far as your teaching portfolio is concerned, and this should be before class planning that's happening, to make sure that those are really clear to you before going in the classroom and setting up your lesson plan, so that anything you incorporate with technology and in the learning environment matches up with that and meshes really well with those goals.
Yeah, really we're talking about being purposeful with the use of technology, not just technology for technology's sake, but having it be part of reaching your learning goals for your course.
Right, exactly, yeah. And then the next step would be the actual planning, your course planning, and maybe that's the overview of what your entire semester is going to look like, or day by day, or how one week might segue into the next week, what you want your students to be doing, and then being mindful about how you're planning your lesson, what activities coming before. Maybe your activity with technology that incorporates technology, what's coming after. Are your students clear about what they're doing with that? Is everything seamless so that it ties back into your teaching goals and the objectives for the class?
Right, and we didn't want to make it seem like you have to have a perfect class every time with seamless transitions, but the idea is to plan for the sequence.
Right, exactly, yeah.
We threw out there the myth that all students just know how to use technology. They've grown up with it, they're digital natives, and so they just know how to use technology, they'll figure it out. And I recall that a myth because there was a survey EDUCAUSE did of all undergraduate students last year that found that only a third of students felt like their instructors had prepared them well enough to do the assignments that they have that involve technology. And so we talked about training our students, whether that's a walkthrough in class, or maybe a handout with step-by-step instructions, but doing something to get them familiar so they know what it is they're supposed to do for an assignment. And for bigger picture things, if you're using a technology piece for the entire semester, you can have software training for students, a resource on campus to come do a training session with your course, and there are online tutorials available as well. But the point is to not just expect that students will figure it out. They need to give some sort of training.
Exactly, yeah. And that feeds directly into our fourth point, which was your specific activities and leveraging your activities, if they have a technological foundation or not, and how that's fitting to your classroom, and equipping your students so they're clear on the directions for that. They know what they should be doing, and you're clear about what you want to be getting out of them. So you're clear, maybe what level of participation you want from them. If you're not getting that feedback from them that you thought you were going to be with the technology-based activity,
right.
Is this something that is working or not? They're clear on what they should be doing. Maybe if you're showing a video or you're having an online discussion, they understand exactly what level of participation you want from them.
Right.
And that you're choosing your activities to match up with your goals and to match up the feel of, with the feel of the class that you want. If you want them to be sitting there for a half an hour, then, creating a blog or doing an online discussion or, doing an iMovie project is not the best activity to choose for that. Then maybe you're showing a video and they're just simply watching it and responding afterwards.
Right, but the leveraging idea is choosing activities that will help you reach your goals. And it's really about doing things with technology that you couldn't do otherwise. One example we threw out there was in a large lecture course, it's difficult to have discussions, and so you could have an online discussion be an element of that. But leveraging technology and doing things you couldn't do otherwise, also the other side of that is not using technology if you don't need to. in my teaching days, the technology that I used the most was the overhead projector, and that's not something we think of as being very techy. But it worked really well for my class, so I could just come up with examples on the fly and put them up on the projector. And so that was what was easy for me. I didn't need to create a PowerPoint for every step of my course.
Exactly. Yeah. If something's not working, I've had plenty of times like that where I thought I was going to be doing something and I wasn't getting the response I wanted from my students, or the technology failed, or I had a bad projector, something just wasn't working. And you have to modify on the fly, and then maybe it's just for that specific class that you're changing what you're doing and the technology wasn't working for you. Maybe that's just not a good activity for what you want to be doing with your students. So if you don't need it, don't use it.
Yeah, and you might not always know ahead of time. It's trial and error, and that's part of the reflection is taking this approach that I might need to tweak things as I go. I might not have everything figured out from day one. And so you have that mindset and share it with your students too, that you'll be trying something and then you're going to adjust it as you go. And that's part of the reflection process.
Right, exactly. And hand in hand with that is making sure that you're always looking back on what worked, what didn't, holding on to what did work, and then looking ahead and modifying that for the future. How can you enhance this? How can you improve it? How can you maybe integrate it in other ways in that class, in different classes? How can you fold it into your teaching portfolio if it's something that you think you've gotten really good at and was very useful for your students?
Right. And I think part of reflection can also be not just looking back, but I don't know if you could reflect forward, but keeping an eye out for other possibilities, other things that you could use in your course.
Right, yeah.
So what do you think are some of the takeaways that you had from our discussion yesterday?
I think my big one would be to do some, planning ahead of time, and to be flexible with your students, to be flexible with the technology, to be able to really operate on the fly, but to have, a plan operating in your head or on paper that's maybe just tentative, so that you can control, not in a really firm way, but that you can manage the technology and the outcome of that as best as possible. But then on the flip side of that, be able to manage the maybe not so great outcome if that's what you're getting,
right.
and then reinvent what you're doing with that.
I like that, controlling the technology. I'm a control freak myself, so I like that image. But like you said, part of planning is also having backups, so that's good. I think for me, one of the big takeaways is training your students so that they can actually perform the assignments that you want them to do, and that way they can focus on the ideas and the concepts and the material that they're learning, they're working with, and so the technology doesn't get in the way of that. That the technology is just a means to discuss ideas and not something that gets in the way. And that comes from being familiar with it and having the training, knowing what to do. I think another big takeaway for me too was that all of these things that we discussed were really just good principles of solid teaching, and we're just adding a technology element to it. It's not rocket science. These are special steps that we take with technology, but they're just good teaching principles in general, and we're adding technology as an element within our course.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what we want to do with the first one, right? Is that we threw out sort of a lot of activities that involve technology. We talked about Google Docs and Learn at UW and all of that, but we didn't want it to be activity-based or, talk about some of these things. The specific technologies, we want it to be very general, so that really every time we say Google Docs, you could replace it with overhead projector, and the outcome and, the planning around that would be the same. With the next one, so with the upcoming seminar, the Undiscovered Treasures seminar, where we will be getting into specific technologies, a lot of them computer-based or web-based, and doing some brainstorming and planning on how to incorporate that into the classroom setting.
Undiscovered Treasures?
Undiscovered Treasures.
Oh, what do you mean?
Yeah, Undiscovered Treasures, subtitle, Getting to Know UW-Madison's Learning Technology Toolbox.
Ooh. So just getting familiar with some tools
exactly.
that are available to
Yep.
instructors.
Yep.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Me too.